All right, so you're thinking about expanding your business, right? You're thinking big, and you've got your eye on France, huh? I mean, it makes sense. It's a market bursting with potential.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just look at the numbers. Huge consumer base, strategic location in Europe. It's really a prime spot for businesses looking to grow.
Yeah, but then comes the hard part, actually getting things up and running over there.
Yeah.
Figuring out all the legal stuff and the HR side of things. Suddenly it feels less like a golden opportunity and more like a giant puzzle, doesn't it?
It can, yeah. It's like you get excited about the potential and then bam, reality sets in. You realize you got to set up a whole new company structure, probably in a language you don't even speak. You got to learn a whole new set of regulations and figure out how to manage employees in a totally different system. It can be pretty overwhelming and take all your focus away from what you actually want to be doing, which is building and growing your business.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
And so that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today in this deep dive, how to simplify that whole process of expanding into France.
Yeah, we're going to explore how you can potentially have your team up and running in France, not months down the line like you might think, but potentially much, much sooner.
Yeah. We're talking about having boots on the ground, so to speak, much faster than you ever thought possible. The secret weapon, something called a professional employer organization, or PEO, and an employer of record, or EOR.
Right. And we're going to focus on one company in particular that offers these solutions, INS Global. They're really interesting because they act as your team on the ground, so to speak, handling all those tricky, nitty-gritty details so you can stay focused on what you do best.
So basically taking all that weight off your shoulders.
Exactly.
Okay, so before we get into the solution, let's paint a picture of the problem, the traditional way of expanding into France. What are some of the biggest obstacles businesses face? What makes it feel so daunting?
I think the first thing that comes to mind for most people is just the sheer time and cost involved in setting up a company in France. You're talking about legal fees, mountains of paperwork, a ton of administrative steps.
It's red tape galore.
Yeah, and all of that translates to a huge investment of time and resources. Time and resources that could be much better spent on actually growing your business, right?
Right. And it's not a one-time thing either, is it? You're not just set up and you're done.
Yeah.
You have to deal with ongoing compliance with French regulations, managing payroll, all the HR tasks.
And French payroll is a whole other beast, let me tell you.
Yeah. So that either means hiring a whole new team just to handle all of that, or stretching your existing team thin, which neither of those are ideal solutions.
No, not at all. And that's where INS Global comes in with, I think, a really smart solution. They offer this streamlined alternative where, as a PEO in France, they essentially let you hire and manage employees over there without having to go through all those hoops of setting up your own separate company.
So they're basically taking care of all that back-end stuff for you.
Exactly. And get this. They say you could potentially have a team up and running in France in as little as 48 hours.
Whoa, 48 hours. That's like,
Yeah.
in the business world, that's practically overnight.
Right. It's a massive difference in timeline.
So how does that work, though? It sounds almost too good to be true. Are they just helping you fill out some forms or something?
It's much more than just paperwork. They also act as what's called an employer of record, or EOR, in France. What that means is they actually become the legal employer for your team over there.
So they're taking on all that responsibility.
Yeah, which really simplifies things for you, especially when it comes to things like taxes and making sure you're completely compliant with every single local labor law. And when it comes to navigating the global talent market quickly and efficiently, INS Global has got this deep experience in international employee mobility, which is a major plus.
I'm seeing a pattern here. It seems like taking care of all that complicated stuff for you is kind of their specialty.
I think that's a pretty fair assessment.
And you know what? If you're listening to this and you're thinking, France is definitely on our radar.
Yeah.
It's probably a good idea to reach out to INS Global now. Get the ball rolling, talk to them about your specific plans and see just how quickly they could help you get started.
I think that's a great idea. They offer free consultations, so why not?
Okay, so let's talk about the benefits. Why is this PEO or EOR approach, especially with INS Global, so beneficial for businesses looking at France? What are some of the key advantages?
Well, first off, you get instant access to their expertise when it comes to French legal compliance, which, let's be honest, can be super complex.
Yeah, a whole different ballgame.
Right, especially if you're coming from a different legal system. But INS Global has legal specialists who know all the ins and outs of French labor laws and can guide you through it all, making sure you're always on the right side of the law.
Yeah, I bet that peace of mind is worth a lot. What else makes this approach so attractive?
It can really help you cut down on overhead. Instead of needing to set up a whole HR department in France or burdening your existing team with those tasks, you're essentially outsourcing all that to INS Global.
So you can just focus on what you do best.
Exactly. You can keep your attention on your core business goals, like your product, your customers, your growth strategy, without getting bogged down in the day-to-day HR stuff in a country you might not be totally familiar with. And of course, as we mentioned before, the speed of market entry is a huge advantage. Instead of waiting potentially 6 months or even longer for company incorporation, INS Global can get you up and running in a matter of days.
Which, in today's fast-paced business world, can be a game changer.
It really can. Plus, INS Global has what they call a Streamlined Services platform, which basically means you have one main point of contact from the very beginning for all the different services you'll need. That simplifies communication and makes the whole process much smoother.
So it seems like using the PEO route with INS Global is quite a different experience compared to the traditional way of setting up your own company in France.
Absolutely. It lets you operate in France without all the downsides of establishing a separate legal entity or having to partner with another company there. You still maintain control over your business and your team, but you get way more flexibility, lower costs, and a much faster setup. Plus, you have the comfort of knowing you're fully compliant with all the legal requirements right from the start.
I was looking at some of the data, and the difference between using a PEO like INS Global and the traditional route is pretty striking. Can we go over some of those numbers again?
Yeah, the numbers are pretty compelling. They show that using a PEO can be as much as 80% less expensive than incorporating a company. And when it comes to market entry, we're talking about 2 to 5 days with INS Global versus potentially 6 months the traditional way. That's a huge difference. They also point out that companies using a PEO could see their employee turnover decrease by about 14%, which is pretty significant. And I think the most interesting statistic is that 98% of current PEO clients report being satisfied with the service. So chances are you'll have a similar positive experience with INS Global.
80% cheaper and getting started in days instead of months. I mean, for a lot of businesses, that's got to be a pretty compelling argument. Yeah. I think there are also some figures about saving money on administrative costs and avoiding those potential legal fines, right?
Right. They say you could save an average of around $450 in administrative fees alone. And maybe even more importantly, they emphasize how using a PEO can help you avoid making costly mistakes with payroll and compliance. When you're dealing with a new legal system, it's easy to slip up, and those mistakes can lead to big fines. It's not worth the risk.
No, not at all.
And there's more. They highlight that companies using a PEO have reported seeing their growth rate increase by 7% to 9%, and their ROI increase by about 27%. And this is a really interesting point. During the pandemic, businesses using this model were much more resilient. They had a 58% lower rate of closure compared to companies that had gone through traditional company incorporation.
Wow. So it's not just about the initial setup cost and speed. It can really affect the long-term stability and growth of your business, especially when unexpected events happen. And speaking of real-world examples, didn't we see a testimonial from a company that uses INS Global?
We did. Manuel Ramos, the managing director of Payroll Asia, said that he sees INS Global as a really valuable way to get started in new and complex markets. He basically made the point that just because you see an opportunity in a market doesn't mean you need to set up a full company structure there right away. Yeah. And that really ties in with everything we've been talking about.
Exactly. So let's say someone's listening to this and they're thinking, okay, I'm convinced this sounds like the right move for us. Mm-hmm. What does working with INS Global in France actually look like? What's the step-by-step process?
Well, the first step is super simple. You just have a conversation with an INS Global expert. You talk to them about what your business needs, what your goals are for expanding into France, and they basically create a custom plan based on your specific needs.
So first, you just talk to the experts.
Got it.
What happens next?
After that, INS Global sets up the necessary legal framework for you to operate in France. So you don't have to worry about going through the long and complicated process of establishing your own legal entity. And then, here's the key part. They take care of hiring your employees in France. They manage all the HR tasks for you, like onboarding, payroll, benefits, all that stuff.
So they're basically acting as your HR department in France.
Exactly. And that means that for you and your team, it's pretty much business as usual. Your employees just keep doing their jobs, focusing on your company's goals, while INS Global takes care of all those behind-the-scenes complexities that come with employing people in France.
That sounds incredibly efficient. So if you're thinking about expanding into France, don't be intimidated by the process. Get in touch with INS Global today and see how they can make it a smooth and successful experience for you.
And speaking of INS Global, we've been talking about PEO and EOR kind of interchangeably. Is there a difference between the two? And does INS Global offer both in France?
Yeah, there is a difference, although it can be a bit subtle. So a PEO, or professional employer organization, is basically a co-employer. They partner with your company and provide a bunch of HR services like onboarding, payroll, benefits administration, all that good stuff. In this model, the agreement is between the PEO and your company. And EOR, on the other hand, an employer of record, they actually become the legal employer of your staff in France. So while they offer a lot of similar services to a PEO, the key difference is that the EOR enters into a direct employment contract with the employee, at your direction, of course, and they're legally responsible for employing them. INS Global offers both PEO and EOR services in France, and they can help you figure out which model works best for your specific situation. Things like the size of your company and whether you already have some presence in the French market will factor into that decision. They even have some in-depth resources that explain the nuances between the two if you want to learn more.
Yeah, I think that clarification is really helpful because it can be a bit confusing. Now, France has its own specific set of labor laws, which can be quite different from what businesses are used to in other countries. What are some of the key things that businesses need to know about French labor law, and how does INS Global help ensure compliance?
French labor law is quite detailed, yeah. For example, understanding the different types of employment contracts is super important. The two main ones are the fixed term contract, or CDD, and the permanent contract, which is CDI. A CDD can only be used for specific temporary situations, and it has to be in writing, whereas a CDI is the standard contract for ongoing employment. Then you've got the minimum wage, which, was a certain amount in 2022, and then it went up in 2023. And then there are regulations around work hours. The standard work week in France is 35 hours, and any overtime has to be paid at specific rates. And employees are entitled to public holidays. There are 11 of them, although only one, May 1st, is actually legally mandated as paid. They also get a generous amount of annual leave, typically 2.5 days for every month worked, which adds up to 5 weeks per year. For sick leave, you become eligible after a certain period of employment, and the amount you get paid typically starts at 50% of your salary, but it can go up to 90% in some cases. And then there are also specific rules around maternity and paternity leave, as well as the whole system of taxes and Social Security contributions. And that can be pretty complex, with employers contributing a significant percentage and employees contributing as well. But the good news is, INS Global's whole purpose is to make sure all these details are handled correctly so you don't have to worry about any legal issues.
It sounds like they really take the guesswork out of it for you.
Yeah, they aim to make it as simple and stress-free as possible.
Now, besides the PEO and EOR services, are there any other ways that INS Global can help businesses that are looking to expand into France?
They do. They actually have a recruitment agency in France. So if you're not only looking for a way to employ people, but also need help finding the right talent in the first place, INS Global can help with that as well. They have these local networks and understand the French job market really well, which can really streamline your expansion process.
So they're like a one-stop shop for all your French expansion needs.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure people listening have a ton of questions. And actually, the INS Global website has a really helpful FAQ section. Maybe we can address some of the most common questions people have.
Sure, let's dive into that.
Okay, so one question that I imagine comes up a lot is, how much does it actually cost to use an EOR in France?
Yeah, that's a natural question. INS Global explains that it's usually calculated as a percentage of the employee's monthly salary, and that includes all the HR services you need to stay compliant with French labor law.
So it's all-inclusive.
Exactly. Another big question is whether using a PEO or EOR in France is actually legal and safe.
Yeah, I bet some people are wondering if it's some kind of loophole or something.
Right, but INS Global assures everyone that it's completely legal and safe. They have these experienced HR professionals and legal experts who handle all the employer responsibilities, so you don't have to worry about setting up your own legal structure in France.
So it's a totally legitimate way to operate.
Absolutely. People also often ask about what the benefits are for their employees when th're hired through an INS Global EOR.
Yeah, what's in it for the employees?
Well, they get full legal protection, they receive their paychecks on time and accurately, and they have access to all the standard French employee benefits like healthcare and pension.
So they're not missing out on anything by being employed through an EOR?
Not at all. And what's interesting is even independent contractors who work within the INS Global EOR framework might be eligible for some of those same benefits while still maintaining the flexibility and control that comes with being an independent contractor.
So it's a win-win for both the employer and the employee. What about finding new employees? Can INS Global help with that beyond the EOR services?
Yes, they can. They have recruitment consultants in France who specialize in finding top-notch local talent. That can really speed up the process of building your team in France. And they can help you hire people anywhere in the country, making sure that everything's done in accordance with all the local and national laws. And they're flexible when it comes to hiring numbers. There aren't any strict minimums or maximums, so you can hire the exact number of people you need.
What about the costs associated with hiring in France? What do businesses need to keep in mind there?
Well, INS Global points out that you need to factor in all the costs. You've got salary, of course, any recruitment fees, potential bonuses, and all the taxes and social insurance contributions, both for the employer and the employee. But the good news is they handle all of that for you.
So you don't have to do all that complex calculation yourself.
Exactly. They really take the burden off your shoulders. Another common question is whether you need a physical office space in France if you're using a PEO like INS Global. And the answer is no, you don't. Using a PEO can actually help you avoid having to set up a local office, although it's always good practice to offer your employees flexibility in where they work. And INS Global can handle hiring both French residents and foreign nationals, so they can help you navigate all the visa and work permit requirements if you need to bring in people from other countries.
So they can help you build a truly global team.
That's right.
I mean, it really sounds like they've thought of everything. To wrap things up, what are some of the biggest reasons why a business should seriously consider partnering with an EOR like INS Global for their HR needs in France?
At the end of the day, it's about making sure your team, whether they're French or international, are employed in a way that's both effective and secure. And it's a solution that works for businesses of all sizes. It allows you to scale your HR support as your business grows in France. And for businesses that don't already have a legal structure in France or just want to avoid the hassle and cost of setting one up, having access to that legal expertise through a PEO or EOR is invaluable. INS Global really understands all the complexities of French payroll and salary, including all those deductions and contributions, and they make sure that you're compliant with all your employer tax obligations. Plus, they ensure that your employees receive all the legally required benefits in France, like health insurance and retirement contributions.
And what about things like changing employment contracts or if you need to terminate an employee, which I imagine are pretty heavily regulated in France?
Yeah, those are definitely areas where having INS Global on your side is really helpful. So changing an employment contract in France requires the employee's consent, and INS Global can help you navigate that process correctly. And terminating an employee can be complex. There are rules about severance pay and things like that, so INS Global can provide expert advice to make sure you're handling everything legally and fairly. They're also very familiar with the regulations set by the Inspection du Travail, which is the French government body that oversees labor laws. And even though only one public holiday is legally required to be paid, it's common practice to offer all 11 as paid leave, and INS Global makes sure you're following those norms as well.
It sounds like having that kind of local knowledge and expertise is really crucial when you're expanding into a new country.
I'd say it's essential.
Well, it's clear that expanding into a new country like France comes with a unique set of challenges. But it's also clear that having a knowledgeable partner like INS Global can simplify the entire process and really make it much less daunting.
It really can. They offer this unique combination of speed, simplicity, and compliance that lets you focus on what you do best, growing your business. They take care of all the administrative and legal hurdles so you don't have to.
So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, yeah, we really want to get a team up and running in France quickly, but we don't want to deal with all the headaches of company incorporation and figuring out a whole new legal system, then reaching out to INS Global might be the best first step you can take.
Absolutely. If you need EOR services in France, contact INS Global today and tell them about your plans. Their team is ready to support all your global hiring needs.
It's amazing to think about how much faster and more efficiently you can grow your business globally by letting experts like INS Global handle all the complexities of international employment. Think about what you could do with all that extra time and resources. It's definitely worth exploring. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.
See you then.